Well, hello everyone and welcome in. My name is Eli Tierney and I am the Outreach Specialist for Vermont Coverts Woodlands for Wildlife. For over 40 years, our organization has been dedicated to empowering landowners and others with the knowledge, tools, and community support they need to manage their woodlands sustainably and enhance wildlife habitat. Through hands-on trainings, educational workshops like this one, and peer-to-peer outreach, we help keep Vermont forests healthy and habitats enhanced across Vermont. Before we start, I'll go over a couple housekeeping items. We ask that you please keep yourself muted to minimize all background noise. Your cameras are welcome to be on or off throughout this presentation. And if you have any questions, please type them in the chat and our presenter will get to them at the end as time allows. If we want to get the chat started, we're all about connections here, so you can say hi in the chat and let us know where you're from. And without further ado, today we'll be hearing from Forest Program Ecologist Tim Duclos from Audubon Vermont as he shares about enhancing forest bird habitat across the state. I'll hand it off to you.
Right on. Thank you, Eli. Thank you for Vermont Coverts and all of you for joining today. This is actually a momentous presentation for me because it is the first that I have ever given from my truck. I lost power about 10 minutes ago up on the hill and came down to the library. So I'm sitting out on Route 30. But here we are. I'm super excited to be here. Spring is underway and our migrant birds are starting to return, and I'm excited to get out in the field. So today I'm going to be talking about Forest for the Birds and the work we do here at Audubon, Vermont, and thinking about managing forests in various ways for our birds, as well as greater ecology and biodiversity. So certainly we'll be talking about Audubon's programs. I'll try to cover all the bases in terms of background context for bird conservation concerns, as well as forest history and the condition of our forests here in Vermont. I'll then talk about various strategies for managing forests for birds and the various habitat elements that we really focus on through our technical assistance work we do with landowners, as well as our work with foresters to think about these things. And then I'll finish up just pitching some of our landowner resources or forester resources available to folks. And I'm very much looking to get out in the woods with landowners this summer. So if any of you are interested in what I have to share today and want to set up a time for me to get out in the woods with you and walk your land, I would love to do that. So as we build context, the Healthy Forest Program here at Audubon, Vermont, which I should mention is part of a much greater National Audubon Society, spans, you know, nationally and hemispherically now. We have our own state chapter as part of that, a little bit different than independent Audubon entities in other states like Mass Audubon or New Hampshire Audubon. Here we're part of the Greater National Audubon. And the forest work we do here in the Northern Forest is focusing on keeping forests as forests first and foremost, and also trying to maintain connected forested landscapes across the whole geography. We're very fortunate in the state of Vermont to have a really robust Agency of Natural Resources and partnership across conservation organizations. And I think, Vermont Conservation Design is just an amazing foundation to stand on to think about forest conservation. So that's how we really look at the statewide strategy in maintaining forests. And we very much are focused on trying to bring the science of ecological forestry and all the aspects of forest health as well as bird conservation to the land and to see it applied across the forested landscape. Of course, all this work happens through so many different partners. Top of the list of which is, of course, Vermont Coverts, as well as Vermont Woodlands Association and our state and federal partners here in Vermont. Many hands make light work. So Vermont is very special so many ways, especially for birds. Here you're looking at an infographic from the Breeding Bird Survey, which is the longest running annual monitoring effort for birds. And the color map here is signifying the number of individual bird species that have been found across the geographies. And you can see that Vermont really stands out. Really, it's the northern forest, our deciduous northern hardwood forest, especially here in northeastern Vermont, that hosts some of the highest levels of bird diversity across the entire nation. So very much Vermont is a breeding factory for birds, and these are both resident birds that stick around throughout the year, as well as migratory birds that go far and wide in the wintertime. We have about 40 species that of songbirds that exclusively focus on some form of the northern forest, whether it's high elevation specialist birds, the Bicknell's thrush, for example, being a very unique bird that is only really found in the northeastern United States at our highest elevation areas. We have a variety of northern hardwood bird species, and a good number of which I'll talk about today. Others that occupy more, wooded stream areas or riparian areas. Others that focus more on evergreen and conifer forests. And then there's a good number that really like young forest and old fields. So I'll be really talking about the northern hardwood birds as well as some of our old field young forest birds, the conifer birds, and the streamside birds, and not so much the high elevation ones. To make it a little bit more accessible and relatable to get into thinking about managing forests for birds, Audubon Vermont has selected what we call the Birders Dozen. These are birds that individually occupy or focus on different habitat features within the forested landscape. And so together, collectively, they kind of capture the whole range of things that we want to see across our forests. And I'm going to talk about all the different conditions that these birds like and what we can do to support them. Vermont has really rich forests, again, although we're going to talk about the condition of the forest in terms of what more we could hope for from it, and what we can do about it. But um, here's an aerial photo actually that one of our audience members, Tim Stout, took at Merck Forest and Farmland Center. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but I'm actually down here in the valley at the library, and I live up here near Dorset Peak. But this really beautifully tells the story of all the different conditions across the forested landscape that make Vermont so special, whether it's regenerating young forest habitat. This was actually a 2-acre NRCS patch cut that I did at Merck Forest about 6 years ago that's grown back really well. Hopefully you can see my cursor here. And has some of our young forest birds in it, so very successful. Surrounded by, some evergreen coniferous forests, spruce trees really right here, and then just a variety of different deciduous trees across the landscape, as well as agricultural areas and more residential areas. Unfortunately, the work we do is ever important because our eastern forest birds are declining, and they have been for a while. There's a variety of reasons why they're declining. Um, Today, I'm mostly going to talk about what I think is the most direct thing that I can do to address their decline. But climate change has had a big effect on birds. A loss of wintering habitat for our migrant birds is a big one. Um, and our insectivorous as well as young forest birds are particularly in decline. A recent paper or really a report from last year, further um, kind of echoes this and shows that what we call disturbance-dependent species, so birds that occupy young forests, so conditions that result from, trees being knocked down by wind events or ice or natural disturbance or logging, those birds are declining, which suggests that they need more disturbance in the forest. They need more canopy gaps. They need more understory structure. So, things I'm going to talk about at length in a moment. And this really, goes to show that this particular group of species is worthwhile for us to focus on, and they're a group of species we can do something about um, through forest stewardship. And really, it comes down to diversity, right? So I think about this in almost the same terms as like maintaining a financial investment portfolio. You want a variety of different assets and different conditions that are going to appreciate at different times. So if you think about forest growth and succession and changes, and the diversity we hope to maintain, um, it kind of fits. And as I mentioned, we want large contiguous blocks of forest. We want to maintain forests, and we want some young forest as well in the landscape. And everything you see here on the right side is all supported by Vermont conservation design. We're actually in the last couple of years at a point of losing forests for the first time in almost a century in Vermont, um, largely losing it to development. So this is not losing it to logging where we're, cutting trees and with the intention of them growing back. This is loss of forests for permanent conversion. And on the right is um, an image of all the roads in Vermont, which I have blown up the roads so you can really see it. But it's pretty incredible when you realize how many roads alone exist in Vermont. And lastly, to kind of cover the history of Vermont forest and how it relates to um, our need to think about stewardship where forests are still recovering, it really comes back to the fact that not too long ago in forest time, we cut all of our forests down in Vermont. So in the 19th century, we gradually cleared the landscape for agriculture. And today, there's only about 0.5%, and that's estimated, of the Vermont forested landscape that remains, having not been touched at all over the last 150 years. And so it's really important to realize that our forests are still growing back and they're still very much teenage forests, and they're not the old growth forests, the complex forests that existed before, and the forests that take centuries to develop over time through natural disturbance. And simply put, visually here, it's a lot of the work that I focus on, aside from passive management, which is really important. Um, is thinking about active management to kind of shift forests from a very simple structure, which you can see here, where the trees are largely the same size, the same species, same age, and there's not a lot of in this photo. You don't see a lot of saplings. You don't see much, mid-story structure. Try to move things from this condition into this, and where you see a lot more lush growth, a lot more structure. It's messier, right? This is the forest that we're really trying to grow in Vermont for the sake of biodiversity and a variety of other uses. And as I mentioned, it's really important to put up front here that there's no one size fits all to how we take care of our forests. And very well, it takes a balance of both passive management, letting forests be and grow back at their own rate and in their own ways. And I largely think about this as the best option for healthy forests, forests that are already on a good trajectory. They don't have a whole lot of health issues. They're not, for a variety of reasons, really vulnerable to climate change or other uh, factors. And on the other side of the coin, there's also opportunities to intervene in ways where through active management, and we call it what it is, logging, we can mimic, hopefully, the natural disturbance patterns that historically and still currently, I mean, just through natural processes, create that diversity. And so it's a very balanced approach, and it totally depends on the forest condition, your values, the strategy that you feel fits best for your forest, and the discussions you have with your forester. And as it relates to kind of moving in that direction and thinking about making plans for your forest and what you can do for birds, it all begins with setting your intentions for what you want to see from your forest. I highly recommend absolutely working with a forester, somebody who you align with in your values and your vision. If you don't already have a forester, Audubon has been working with a group of foresters and training them that I could set you up with or suggest to you. Um, and with that forester, you go through a process of evaluating the forest condition, kind of like a doctor would evaluate a patient to see um, how that patient is faring. And then depending on how the forest is looking and what you want to see from your forest, you start to create stewardship plans or management plans for taking care of it. And from there, it's a matter of time and patience and gradually implementing actions as a part of that plan to tend your forest, if tending is what you intend to do, in various ways towards what you want it to be. And it involves, contacting professionals, what definitely a forester. There's Vermont Coverts, as you obviously know. Myself, there's a lot of other organizations in the state that offer free technical assistance to help you think about how you manage your forest with your forester. And definitely also involving your descendants is really important so that there's continuity in your efforts over time because this is a long game that we're playing here when we talk about managing forests. So from here, I'm going to move into the specific things we look for in our forests and specifically the things that I hope to see covered in forest management plans. Audubon has a variety of resources available to, guidance that sets benchmarks for we want, or we would suggest you have X amount of snags or X amount of, you know, X, Y, and Z things. I'm going to go through that, as well as there's plenty of other resources out there through, UVM Forestry Extension, Vermont Coverts, and others that are all great resources to think about. But starting with snags, standing dead trees, really important in our forest. We have a variety of songbirds that nest in these trees. Black-capped chickadees will nest in cavities. Cavities, of course, formed by our woodpeckers, like the yellow-bellied sapsucker. Even wood ducks will nest, they do nest in snags next to standing water. Our brown creepers will actually nest in these little like hammock-like nests under kind of sheets of bark that are coming off these trees. And so, a forester um, by default is largely likely to look at the commercial value of live trees on your property and may discount the um, disregard like the value of snags, but it's really important that some snags exist on your property and you can create some too as well. We also want to see a variety of fruit and food sources, starting with fruit. Black cherry is a great example of a tree that is common in the northern hardwoods that is fruit bearing. But you also see species, especially around agricultural fields like hawthorns, elderberry, and dogwoods. So trying to think about the food sources for wildlife and to treat these trees as your crop trees and trying to manage for them on your forest is really important. Hard mast, which is, nuts and berries, those are equally important food sources for other birds and greater wildlife. Beech nuts, for example, are sought after by turkeys as well as bears. Here you can see a bear-scarred beech on one of the properties I was on. Acorns, red oak are another important food source for wildlife. So thinking about, again, maintaining food sources on your property and explicitly calling that out in your management plan is important. I mentioned alternate leaf dogwood or dogwoods in general. These are a great plant tree that you find throughout the forest, especially on forest edges. Important fruit source for birds. Elderberry is another one of my favorites to find in the forest, and especially along like woods roads and old skid trails. Invasive plants are really important to keep an eye out for. There's over 49 terrestrial invasive plants known in Vermont. VT Invasives is a great resource to ID these invasive plants and also learn management strategies for them. Invasive plants reduce diversity by outcompeting native plants, and they also typically host lower amounts of insects that these insectivorous birds especially like. And the berries, for example, on many of these plants are, it's like junk food. It's like Sour Patch Kids. It's not very good for these birds, and they, will eat them readily and spread them throughout the forest, doing a disservice for the greater forested community. So taking care of invasive plants is really important, especially before any harvest happens that's going to disturb the forest. We also like to see messy forests. So again, this is just remnants of natural disturbance. Nature trees fall and they stay in the forest. Uh, and as it relates to active management, um, we recommend that the treetops are kept in the forest. You don't lop treetops. That used to be like a professional standard that foresters um, maintain. They felt like they, owed it to their clients. Their clients expected all the treetops to be lopped down, but in today's times, we're really trying to get landowners to be okay with just like leaving it messy. These are places where birds are going to hide out, insects will hide out. They also serve as guards against deer browse as well. So there's many benefits to down trees. And large diameter logs, for example, also are sought after sites for ruffed grouse to get up and drum, looking for mates in the springtime. Here's an example of what we call a beautiful mess. So this is at Vermont Land Trust property in Duxbury, Pratt Refuge. This is a 2-acre patch cut completed by the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps. And here we're trying to create some young forest habitat, which is really non-existent or very much, well, there's not a whole lot of it in that area. And and the trees that were growing there were pretty much all the same age, same size. This was a patch cut from about 25 years ago. And so it was a good candidate for resetting succession, right? You never want to give up like mature forest, beautiful, complex forest for young forest, but where the conditions are conducive, you can create some really good habitat. And within the first year, we had white-throated sparrows in there bouncing around. They're one of the young forest birds. Um, and this is, it's retaining all the carbon in these trees on site. Um, they are just adding organic matter to the soil. And again, just a rich place for a lot of wildlife to hide out. Um, we also here are looking at some retention of snags in another patch cut, clear cut. So these are great habitat features to keep, in this area. The woodpeckers will still come in and uh, hang out in these snags and whatnot. And you also see some conifer covers. So again, it's kind of like trying to maintain a mix of various elements for wildlife throughout your management efforts. And yeah, it's all about a good mix. More good coarse woody material, down woody material here in this little opening. Ovenbird, one of my favorite birds. They also like messiness on the forest floor. They, true to their name, they get or they use leaf litter to create these little ovens that they nest in. This was this is a photo from Pratt Refuge as well, near one of their managed areas. So healthy leaf litter is also really important for these guys. Tip down trees. Again, evidence of natural disturbance. The root balls themselves, all this soil is a great place for the winter wren, another one of my favorite birds, to nest. Black bears will nest in um, hibernate in the space below these root balls, and the ruffed grouse will drum on um, the tree trunk as well. So I love tip down trees. It's good to avoid, as I mentioned, lopping slash as well as chipping material. Again, it's trying to kind of counter the past practices or standards by which some foresters operate, where they felt like they needed to keep everything clean. And so again, messy is good. Collecting sticks is another thing that I try to advocate against. In some conditions or some places, like brush piles are good for certain species, like New England cottontail, for example. But in general, trying to leave the forest messy as it naturally wants to be is your best policy. So moving on to what we call like layering or structural diversity, we're hoping largely across the landscape for an uneven age structure. Um, and this is just it's a product of multiple generations of trees growing, in the forest matrix, and those various generations of trees are seeded at various times through natural disturbance or logging. We look at things kind of across four layers. As I mentioned, the forest floor itself, we're looking for um, a good mess there and a healthy leaf litter layer within the hardwood forest for the ovenbirds. We also want, some dense sapling structure. Regeneration is what you'll see that described as in your forest plan. The black-throated blue warbler is kind of the poster child for a bird that focuses on that understory layer. From there, other birds occupy what we call the mid-story, which goes from about head height up to 30 feet in height. Our wood thrush, hermit thrush nest in that layer. That's kind of like your mid-generation of trees. And then at your topmost layer, above 30 feet, we have the canopy or the overstory. And certain birds like to just occupy that space exclusively. The scarlet tanager, for example, will nest up there. They like to perch up high where they can see down through to the forest floor. And so I kind of describe this also as kind of like a multi-level apartment building where everybody kind of lives on different levels. They might go to different levels to feed, but they'll nest at different levels. And so if you can provide structure across those various levels, you're going to provide the greatest amount of habitat for these birds. Some more photos from the field. Here's a nice example of some sapling regeneration that's moved up into the mid-story in this canopy gap surrounded by this hemlock stand. I just love this photo because, it just shows how the forest responds to disturbance, and it speaks to me in ways of, I can see where blue-headed vireos and black-throat green warblers are gonna like those hemlocks in the background. And then the eastern wood pewee, for example, which is an aerial insectivore, is going to like to perch on the edge of this opening and swoop in and grab insects. And then maybe you've got a black-throated blue warbler that's kind of focused on some of the saplings that are in here. It's just a good diversity of conditions. Here's another photo from Pratt Refuge. This is about 6 years after they had done some active management to thin the stand out, and you can really see how the forest has responded quite well. There's lots of saplings, lots of sized stuff in the mid-story, as well as some of those mature trees that are still um, hanging out in the canopy. So it's just a great blend of conditions for a variety of birds. Other things that we want to look for in our forest is an effort to retain large diameter trees. So we could call these legacy trees, typically 20 to 24 inches in diameter and larger. These are the trees that have the greatest amount of carbon. They are most likely in the near term to form cavities and places for birds to hang out, and as well as fall over at some point through natural disturbance. So we want large diameter, mature trees like this in the forest. We also sometimes see remnants of, past land use. These are what I would call wolf trees, for example. They're trees that definitely have survived past land clearing and are among the oldest in the forest here. And again, the cavities that form in these trees as they slowly decay are homes to a whole variety of wildlife, birds as well as mammals, bats, squirrels, porcupines, raccoons and whatnot. So they're wildlife hotels. Canopy gaps are really important. They're what result from forest disturbance, and it's how sunlight hits that forest floor and stimulates sapling growth, which, creates future structure in that forest. Um, It all depends on the forest condition and a variety of factors that your forester is best suited to advise on towards when it's best to create canopy gaps. But in general, we need these gaps in order to, as I mentioned a moment ago, get the next generation of trees growing in the forest. More heavy-handed prescriptions that extend to, what we call regeneration harvests, patch cuts, clear cuts, large group selections. These are best suited for when the forest is in a really unhealthy condition and it's essentially hitting the reset button on the forest. You can imagine this is what would result from a microburst or a small, hurricane or ice storm event, right? Um, and these areas, which I'll just call them young forest or early successional habitat areas, are particularly valuable to a unique set of bird species that occupy only young forests. Generally, you're looking at like a half acre to an acre or more of this kind of condition to start to get some of those young forest birds. And again, across the Vermont landscape, just given where we're at in our forest, largely all growing back at the same rate, the same time over the last century and a half, we're in a position where we don't have a whole lot of this young forest in Vermont. This is all what I kind of just mentioned. Again, Audubon Vermont stands behind Vermont conservation design. That's what we use to base our recommendations on. And generally, across all biophysical regions in Vermont, the target is for 3 to 5% of that forested landscape to be in this young forest regenerating condition. And it's important to keep in mind that these forests grow back really quickly. And within 15 to 20 years, this young forest will have matured to a point where the birds that we're looking to support with this forest are no longer favoring it. Once it becomes like all dense pole size stuff, and enters the stem exclusion phase, these birds are gonna need young forest somewhere else. So it's very much ephemeral. It's something we have to think about recreating across the landscape where it's compatible with um, objectives. Briefly, the young forest birds that we focus on, these are specialist birds within our young forests. Down eastern southern Vermont, we have the eastern towhee slowly moving up in latitude with a changing climate, and as young forest is being created. Chestnut side warbler, one of my favorite birds. They are very common in these young forest areas as well as along field edges. Um, the oh, excuse me, the mourning warbler is kind of picky. It wants larger patches of young forest, like on the scale of 2 acres or more. And then we get more specialist birds that you might only find in the Champlain Valley that really actually occupy more of what we call like shrubland and not so much young forest, but I'm grouping them here. So these are the golden winged warblers, the blue winged warblers. They really like abandoned agricultural land that is kind of stuck as a shrubby condition. American woodcock, they're back, they're singing. I love them. They really like old fields that are more grassy rather than woody. Indigo bunting, they just like more open areas in general, in just a variety of conditions. Some more beautiful young forest habitat on properties I've been to. This was a salvage harvest. They had experienced a wind event that knocked all these pines down in this plantation, and this is what's grown back just in a couple years. And it was just full, full of these birds, and it was awesome to see. More young forest habitat. This is a beautiful property that Alan Thompson's been managing. Here again, you can see how you've got really dense vegetation growing back, but it was designed in a way that he retained a lot of a decent portion of the desirable overstory trees, and effectively by opening things up such that only 30% of this area retain those overstory trees, and the other 70% was cut so it could regenerate. That's enough to support the young forest birds while also giving some continuity to the more desirable mature structure that was already on site. So it was a great blend of things in the application of this work. As I kind of wrap up here towards the end, other features I look at are standing water, vernal pools, seeps, brooks and ponds. We want to make sure that we map those and we put adequate buffers around them where we're not doing any disturbance. We want to keep plenty of shade in these areas. Certain bird species like the Louisiana water thrush, for example, focuses on rocky stream beds within the forest. They like that. Red-shouldered hawks also focus on these features. And a little bit outside the forest area when it comes to these old fields, we want to also see ideally a soft edge or a feathered edge. So a section of sapling growth um, along the perimeter that just eases the transition from the open area into the mature forest. And some of those young forest birds that I mentioned, as well as others, like a lot of our sparrows, for example, um, will nest in those edges as well. It's also a prime area for invasive plants to grow, so it can be a bit of a tricky thing to try to manage for. But it all comes back to the principle of trying to blend things together so that you don't have like just black and white conditions, hard transitions. You want a little bit of everything is just gently kind of blended together into a mosaic. Here's a photo of an old log landing that has grown back some really nice aspen and gray birch on the edge. So beautiful feathered edge here. Old field management, something I've talked to Tim Stout about a bit too, and a lot of landowners. Trying to delay mowing in these areas to every 2 to 3, if not more years, depending on how things grow, is great for wildlife. It's great for insects by supporting the flowers that are growing in there in the variety of herbaceous vegetation. And what's even better is if these old fields can be blended with a soft edge. So here you see like, trembling aspen and some balsam fir and a variety of other trees that are, they're young pole-sized trees, but they're offering great cover just blended within that mosaic of herbaceous cover across the field. It's just really cool habitat here. And then lastly, we need to think like a landscape and think about, it's not just our property, but it's all the properties that together comprise our landscape. And so trying to think about how we can work with our neighbors, work with, policy, decision makers to affect conservation planning at a larger scale than just our own little parts and pieces is going to be vital to maintaining a rich, connected landscape in Vermont. This book, Ecological Silviculture, is a great one. And I think just the concept of ecological silviculture, managing forests as ecosystems is the way to be. And that's what we've been talking about today. All these features also in a microhabitat way exist around your home. So just thinking about, again, maintaining snags, where they're not a threat to your house, of course, but a variety of food, water resources, cover, um, wildflowers. It's all a matter of scale. So everything we talked about in the forest totally applies around the house as well. As I mentioned, I do free landowner visits where I'll come out, meet with you, ideally meet with your forester as well, and I'll talk about bird habitat in conjunction with your stewardship plans. If folks want to take a photo of this, these QR codes will take you to our website where you can link up with me. We also have a variety of guides and resources available to help you think about these things, as well as a checklist of things to look through with keywords in your forest plans. And lastly, you can also just email me and we can connect in that way and make a plan for getting out in the woods together. So with that, right, good time. I want to thank you for your time and attention and for Vermont Coverts for hosting me, and I'd gladly talk about anything y'all want to talk about.
Thanks, Tim. Before we get on to questions, I just want to shout out that Coverts and Audubon will be doing a walk in Merck Forest on May 23rd. I'll put the link for the registration in the chat in a second. But if you want to join and hear more about birds and see some of that in action, we
Mm.
will have that going on.
Yep. So you can totally connect with me through Coverts, and um, I'll be at the cooperator training coming up in a couple weeks too. Yeah. Marlboro, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Potash Hill, full training. Very excited.
Yeah. I've really fogged up my truck, I'll tell you what.
First question we have is why do we have less young forests than pre-colonization?
We just the nature of having let the forests grow back. You know, we don't have the beavers on the landscape that we used to. Beavers were a big driver of a bit of the young forest. And, native peoples also sometimes would burn forest and create some disturbance in the forested landscape. But largely, we've just kind of heavily m- logged the landscape. Then we walked away and just let it all grow back. And it's kind of all grown back at the same time. So we don't know a whole lot more that I'm aware of the condition prior to colonization, just the nature of, record keeping, lack thereof. But from the research I've read, that's what we've estimated. That's a great question.
Our next question is that is there worried with is there worry with delayed mowing allowing more invasives to spread? This person says that they were recommended to mow their field at least annually to prevent that.
Yeah, it's all it's all a trade-off, right? So, ideally you're going those plants are going to proliferate one way or another. I mean, if you're mowing them, a lot of them will coppice sprout, meaning they'll just grow back several more stems from the base. It totally depends on what invasive plants you have. Coppice growth is really uh, woody vegetation, but I largely think about trying to remove the plants rather than mow them to suppress them. And so hand pulling or using herbicide, or, cutting them and spraying the stump with herbicide. I would personally, on my land, that's the way I go. And then let the field continue to grow. Yeah.
And you shared the Vermont invasives resource earlier as well, which I think is a great
Yep.
place for people to get information about different invasive strategies.
Yep. Yep. And the natural resource conservation districts throughout Vermont, the district managers have really good resources on managing invasives as well. Yeah.
Our next question is how best to manage the soft edge without overgrowing.
Yeah. Hinge cutting is one method. So once the trees get 20 feet tall or thereabouts, or, 3, 4, 5 inches in diameter, like certain species grow really well, like aspen, for example, gray birch and others. If you just cut about 90% through the stem and then push the rest of the tree over, uh, and it'll stump sprout in that way. So trying to target those trees that have reached that 15 to 20 foot height and cutting them, either completely or hinge cutting them, is the strategy I would recommend.
Thanks for sharing that. Our next question is what resources would you recommend for managing maple sugar lots for birds?
Yeah, Audubon actually has its own program just focused on sugar bushes as well. So our bird-friendly maple program, led by Steve Hagenboo and Fen Levy, they're a great resource for um, thinking about managing sugar bushes for birds. So bird-friendly maple. Yeah.
Just got one more question. Do you have any recommendations for someone in White River Junction area to help the removal of large invasive shrubs? Um, Giant invasive honeysuckle. Uh,
Yeah. I would I would reach out to your conservation district up in that area But also consulting firms like Redstart, for example, do invasive species removal um, as a service. There's also another gentleman, and I'm totally blanking on his name right now, who does invasive species removal. So if you want to email me, I can drum up his name and give you his name. Um, yeah. Otherwise, I'm totally blanking on greater resources right now for people that help you with invasive species removal as a contractor. Yeah.
That's a great start for them, I think, and
Yeah.
thanks for
Yeah.
being willing to share the name.
So success stories. I mean, we've recovered our eagles. Bald eagles are doing really well in Vermont. Um, and our ospreys are doing really well. So those are two species of birds that were really affected by DDT and the effects on their eggs. We're seeing a lot of our it's not really recovery, but a lot of our generalist birds are doing quite well. Otherwise, species specific recovery efforts. It's almost like sad to say that I not a whole lot are like popping into my mind, but the eagle and osprey are two really good examples. Oh, another one would be like our common terns. Audubon has been monitoring and managing common terns on two islands. I think there's two in Champlain, and Mark Labar, who leads that, is he's basically concluded that they are good to go, and their population's doing really well there. Yeah. Yes. I can't see the rest of the question, but hesitant to use herbicides. I feel the same way. Every spring oh, stump painting is very, I hesitate to recommend herbicides because I am not a licensed herbicide applicator. I, I, I use Roundup, rodeo, and really only for garlic mustard in very light concentrations, 2%. I spray it. I just sprayed my garlic mustard. I know you didn't ask about garlic mustard, but I just sprayed it this past Saturday because it was the only thing that has come up. And they're super sensitive as little rosettes for to the herbicide. And I've been doing it for 4 years, and I've already seen a positive result. So I feel good about that. But as for like you know, foliar spraying and other more aggressive applications, I would very much talk to a somebody who specializes in managing invasive plants to get their recommendation. Yeah,
I think we can wrap it up there. Thank you for your time today. It was really great hearing you talk about forest birds. Um, and thank you all for coming to listen. This recording
yeah,
will be available in about a week, so if you want to rewatch it or share it with anyone you know, it will be shared out.
awesome. Well, thank you, Eli, and thank you everybody for coming and the great questions you asked too.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Yeah.